things going on. I know you know that, so let's just start with the calendar again. I am having an event for Zeph Capo tonight. He's in a runoff election for Houston Community College. This is at my home. It's really being hosted by Stephen Costello and his wife and Anna Eastman are throwing this event at my house. Zeph is a good guy. He's running against a not-so-good person. You can Google the stuff for yourself or whatever if you're interested. I don't try and get too political, but good people should win and bad people should lose. And so I'm supporting that. Our signs are out there. There'll be signs in my yard. I'd like for a few people to show up. You don't have to bring any money or anything, but if you're interested in showing up, we need a few people to show up over there. I assure you that the Stephen Costello is running for mayor in 2 years. If you want to have a little conversation with someone who might be a mayoral candidate early on in their race, might be interesting just to chit chat with Mr. Costello if you're so inclined to do so.
Is he a PH or a B?
What?
He's a PH.
PH.
He's a PH.
Zeph is a PH.
PH.
No, Stephen.
Stephen's a PH too.
Yeah, I don't know. PhD? What are you
No.
talking about?
How do you spell his name?
Gotcha. No problem there. Hayride. We have Hayride. Melissa had this organized and we were able to take it over. This is a Hayride starting at 8 p.m. It's a little late
You
there.
can
but-
change it. Hey, you can change it.
Is it possible to change it?
Yeah, I don't care.
No.
6 o'clock.
Yeah, I'd love to route this to about 6:30.
That's when we do our family one, like
Do
shorts.
you have kids?
Yeah, the kids, I thought at 8 was a little late.
Yeah.
Would you contact them and see if we can go to
We'll
6:30?
do it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go for 6:30. I think this is much easier for people with families. I'm paying for the event. It's free for everyone there. Yes, Terry?
Is this an actual horse-drawn thing?
No, it's a tractor drawn.
It's not
okay.
just lights on it.
It's a tractor, it's a
very
big
fun.
whitetail, it's a yellow
You
tractor.
tour,
it's got-
Christmas
Yeah, it sounds like
lights.
fun.
It's a lot of fun.
It is.
Are we gonna be throwing candy?
Sing Christmas songs.
Can I know Betty?
Beverage.
I've always wanted to be on a
We'll
party.
always take care of the beverages. You can bring some of what you want, but we'll enhance the hayride here. We'll subsidize some stuff. So
Do we meet here?
Meet here.
that is tomorrow, 6:30. Just so you know, the holiday home tour for the Houston Heights Association is this weekend. There's a patron party Thursday night at the fire station. If anyone is just mad about going and visiting with 100 of your closest friends in the Heights, let me know. I am a corporate sponsor. I have tickets. I have tickets to the holiday home tour, which is Friday night and Saturday during the day. We have plenty of tickets if you're so inclined. Happy to give the tickets away to people that will use them. I will not be using them. So if you'd like any information about that, let me know about that. Reminder that the company Christmas party is a week from Friday. We created a sign up. My assumption is that people are going to come with a significant other unless I hear otherwise, and we eliminate from that deal. Joe is cooking. We have tomato basil soup as an appetizer, crab cheesecake, passed around hors d'oeuvre. We have beef tenderloin. We have fingerling potatoes and green beans and all kinds of nice things over there. Thanksgiving went away and Christmas threw up over there at Balin yesterday, so it's all finished. Christmas decorations are now up for the next round of activities.
What time is the party on Friday?
The party starts at 7.
7 to 10.
7 to 10 on Friday the 13th. Also on Thursday, I am hosting an event. The Democratic women are hosting this event. That's free to anyone. Independents, Republicans, progressives, libertarians are also welcome. But there are a lot of female Democratic politicians at my home from 6 to 10 if you're so inclined and wanted to visit with the mayor, the current mayor, State Senator Sylvia Garcia, State Representative Jessica Farrar, any of those type of female Democratic office holders, they will be there. Anna Hernandez Luna, any of those type of people would be at that event, and you're welcome to show up for that. It's a very casual sort of event over there. Our mail out went out about the Kirby office. I had about 20 or 30 people talk to me about it, so I know that people got it. We mailed 3,400 of those deals, and the new round of cards will go out later this week. It is really just, and it's called an attitude of gratitude. It's just a thankful sort of little card that's going out to all the clients for life. and it should hit their mailboxes by the middle of next week or whatever. I didn't want to get caught up running Thanksgiving, I wanted to kind of after that. Those are some general announcements there. Anyone else have anything major going on I need to comment about?
About the office, it'll be like mandatory, so they can put it on their calendar now.
Yes, I mean, the kickoff meeting, which is mandatory, I would be upset if someone's not there, is Tuesday, January 7th. We are still confirming the location. I suspect that it will be at the Houstonian this year. I suspect that we'll have, 9 to 1 o'clock of activities, luncheons, speeches, conversations, and then we open it up and I would subsidize and pay for massages, facials, pedicures, manicures, that sort of thing until the end of the day there. So that's my mindset of what's going on.
But you need to let us know if you want any of those.
Yes, well, we will
spots.
confirm the Houstonian and then we will show you what your options will be from 1 to 5.
It's got a
You
lot
don't
of us.
have to do those sort of things, but I'm telling you that because I think you should block off most of your day.
It's an all day?
It's an all-day type of event.
Is it really? It's not
Massage for birthday.
Can I find a rock wall?
David's
David.
Tennis
Trellis
lessons?
is fantastic.
Okay, at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, always purge my life. I like to get rid of crap. I'm a minimalist the older I get or whatever. So I'm giving away, these are some books that I there are duplicates of or that I no longer wanted. So I just bring things to the island, help yourself. Some of these are business, some of these are health, some of these are just whatever, but help yourself there to anything that you would like there. Okay, we're going to go over 2 topics today. One is buyer's representation, agreement, representation in general, and then we're going to go into fair housing over there. So we created some things we passed out. Does everyone have the buyer's rep agreement? Everyone have this? And then does everyone have this agency relation handout here? Okay. We've gone over this before. We're going to go over it again. We need some more copies. We're going to start with this. This handout comes from the Code of Ethics training that we're supposed to have every so often. We're going to have some key points. The key point in real estate is that unless otherwise designated, anytime you're working with someone, realtors in Texas represent the seller. When there's a sign in the yard, of course the listing agent represents the seller. But when you go to show a house, the mindset in the state of Texas is that you represent the seller. You have to have permission from a buyer in order to represent them. And we commonly do this the opposite, that this is my client and I'm going to go show them houses, okay? And we misappropriate those words on a very common basis. And this handout kind of makes it clear. Leslie, come on in. Those people are customers, they're not clients of yours. They are customers until you enter into some formal agreement where they become your client. Now, if you have a listing, that person that you represent, you have a signed listing agreement, that is your client. There's no ambiguity about whether or not you represent the seller or not. You have a signed listing agreement with that person. That person is your client. When someone calls on your sign, you represent the seller, not the buyer, and that person is a customer who's made an inquiry into that deal. Your obligation is only to provide information that's both ethical and honest, but in the seller's best interest. The seller, I'm assuming, would allow you to tell them how many bedrooms and baths and the square footage. But you must be clear. You have to know when they ask you, why are these people selling? You have to be careful about what you say. When you take your listing, then you need to make sure that you discuss it with the listing, with the seller about what it is that we're going to tell. Are we going to tell them you're getting a divorce? Are we going to tell them that you're getting transferred? Are you going to tell them that you already have another house, that you just want to upsize, you want to downsize? What is the reason that we're selling? When I enter into my listings, I know, if it's a builder, then it's clearly they're a builder who are selling for a profit. I mean, it's not implied otherwise. It's a profit scenario that the builder is intending to sell the house for a profit, whatever that number is. Maybe a loss, but their intention was to sell it for a profit. If your 520 Omar has bought another house, they've lived there 20 years, they don't have to sell. We talked about keeping it another year or two. I think it's only going to be more valuable 2 years from now, but they will sell now if the terms are acceptable to them, and they will not sell otherwise. They're not negotiable. They tell me to tell people they are not negotiable. So when people want to call me and offer $840, I say don't waste the 8 pages of paper. These sellers will keep it until they get the number that they want. But that's the conversation they want me to have with people. They don't want a bunch of offers. Some people do, some people don't. But we represent the seller. So the unclear deal is when Greenwood King has a sign over there, and one of your friends wants to go see the house over there, and you're happy to go show them the house. Initially, we still represent the seller of that house, even though it's Greenwood King's listing. You have to have permission from your customer to enter into a relationship that creates the client relationship. And it does not have to be as formal as a buyer's rep agreement. It can be an understanding. I am your representative and you want me to represent you. When I meet with potential buyers, I go over the information of brokerage services. You have to explain. Brokers either represent the seller or the buyer or both. Initially, when there's a sign in the yard, we represent the seller. We have to have the permission of the buyer to represent them. And then, if it's a listing within Boulevard Realty, we have to have permission of the seller also for us to represent those buyers, creating intermediary relationship there. When it's Greenwood King's listing, I don't need any permission from Greenwood King. I just need clarity that the customer has become a client. Okay? Now, often we just go show houses all the time to people, and you show them for 3 months, and all of a sudden they call a listing agent, and they go over there and they see a house because they don't want to bother you. Okay? And it happens all the time. It's clear in our industry. They need to go over there and tell the other agent, though, they have a relationship with the broker. Bill Baldwin, Boulevard Realty, is my agent. It's no problem. We've created an environment that agent, representing the seller, understands that she's showing on behalf of the seller, our client. It's no big deal. The reality of it is, our buyers feel uncomfortable that they may not get to see the house that way, so they just don't say anything. And because realtors just want to show the house, sometimes people don't ask. If we were very good at it, we'd say, are you working with an agent? Very common conversation. And once again, we know that buyers are liars and they don't always tell the truth. They may have been working with an agent, but they are not obligated to use that agent when we go and if they just want to look at a house, unless they have a signed buyer's rep agreement with a particular brokerage firm. Okay? Now, I'm not a huge fan of buyer's rep agreements. As an agent, I never have been. As the broker, I never have been. I don't preach about it very much because I think it makes people feel very uncomfortable. And I know that it does. And so, for the most part, we're very laissez-faire over here. And only when it's required do we require it. It's required that we have a buyer's rep agreement when we sell one of our own listings in-house. We have a written listing agreement that explains how intermediary works, and we must have a signed buyer's rep agreement. If Jeannie buys one of Melissa's listings, our insurance company and the real estate commission want us to have this in writing, a buyer's rep agreement for that transaction. So, we're not into these blanket buyer rep agreements like other people use, but they're available. I've taken the 6-page form and I've consolidated into this little 2-page, as brief as I could possibly make it, so that people will feel more comfortable with it. And this form is between you and your customer becoming a client, and it establishes the role of the firm and what everyone's going to do. So, from the firm's perspective, I only need for you to do this when it's required. You buy one of our listings, I need this form filled out, I need it filled out appropriately. Otherwise, I think you have to use your best judgment, okay? If I were referred a client and they were coming in from out of town, I was going to spend 2 days showing them the city, and I got to show them Bel Air, Westview, and Memorial, I would forward the form to them and see if they would sign it. If they're unwilling to sign the form, then I'm probably unwilling to give up 2 days of my time to go show someone a tour of the city. They should go to the Greater Houston Partnership and let them show them the city. I'm not about giving tours of the city for 2 days or whatever. I'm happy to tell people about the city because I love the city, but I can't use that much time for people who are not willing to enter into a written agreement that I will represent them in the event that they buy a house over there. So there's ample opportunity for you to clarify how to use the form. If you need to show one house to someone, this form could be used to enter into an agreement for the one house. If I were showing a for sale by owner, I would probably want my client to enter into this agreement because there is no agreement that the seller is going to pay anyone. So if they want us to represent them, then we need to make it clear that we don't represent the seller there, because that's just someone individual selling their house, remember? So there's no representation. We're just going along with a friend when we go and show a FSBO, unless you have a signed buyer's rep agreement. Yes, Terry?
Going back to the Greenwood King listing again, you're saying that we technically represent the seller.
You do represent the seller when you initially show the house and you have a customer who has not entered into a written agreement.
But we write that contract up. We don't have that thing, but we still on the back of that contract say we're representing that buyer.
When you represent a buyer and they want to enter into a contract and you make the offer and you check the box that you are representing the buyer, you are entering into a relationship with them. And it is clear to the other side who we represent, and it's clear to the buyer that we represent. You don't have to have a buyer's rep agreement in order to make an offer on Greenwood Kings, because it's in writing, and it's clear that we don't represent the seller, that we represent the buyer. And then we've entered into a relationship that TREC, PAR, and the court system all understands we now represent that buyer, and they're entered into a written agreement via the contract that we're going to represent them as a buyer's agent. And it was clear to the world. What's not real clear is when your client goes over to Greenwood Kings, makes an offer, and that agent checks the box that they represent only the seller. That buyer often thinks they can come back to us and we could represent them now. And we can't. Once they've entered into an agreement that Greenwood King wrote that contract, then we can't go back and have torturous interference into their contract. This happens very frequently in our industry. A friend calls and they're under contract. They thought they were being represented by someone, but they're really not. The agent only represents the seller, and they want us to do something for them. And it's very clear that with regards to that contract, we can't help them negotiate, advise on that contract, or have any interference with that contract. We can explain how real estate works. You can explain an option period to the cashier at Target or to anyone that calls about it. We can explain how earnest money works to the dog walker, or to that individual. But we can't give specific references to what Bridget Larson should do or the seller of 301 East 16th should do. We're not allowed to enter into any sort of form that, unless they want to hire us and pay us 3% on, seller was paying that other agent 6%, we must enter into a new deal and provide that information over to them and say, just like a lawyer, they could hire someone to represent their interests so long as the compensation was agreed. But we all understand that seller and that firm are not paying us a dime. We'd have to enter into a new deal. So we get these, I can give advice and give real estate advice, about how real estate works. I can't interfere into that contract. Yes, Jim?
So if someone were to come in and we're sitting in the conference room, the question is, the guy's going to say, well, what are my options? You can't say, what can you say?
Have we entered in, are they in another contract?
Yeah, let's say they entered into a
You
contract
can
and
review, you
realized
can
they
look
made
at
a
their
mistake.
contract and say, you're still in an option period, you have the unrestricted right to terminate. You could
So
say-
you can tell them that, or you can
Sure,
tell
I
them.
give TAF advice on how real estate works all the time on transactions having to do with mortgages with other firms that Bullpark Realty is not.
But that's
involved
not interfering
with.
with,
It's not torturous interference if you just explain how real estate works. I'm explaining to you how real estate works, it's no big deal.
but you're not encouraging them to do it. You're just
I'm not allowed to give them
explaining.
any advice with regards to that contract.
Right.
I can give them comps. I can give anyone comps. I can give anyone comps to like their property taxes at HCAD, if they're getting a divorce, if a bankruptcy judge wants me to give a broker opinion of market value, I can give someone an opinion of market value. There's nothing illegal about that. That's what we do is, give our opinion of market value, but you can't, I don't want to give them that information that goes that, well, Baldwin says I'm overpaying, I want a $50,000 reduction in the contract. I don't want them to go and say that.
But what if you go, well, you're in an option period and then you can opt out and raise your eyebrows and he opts out
Well,
and then comes to you.
Jeannie
That'd
has
be
a
little
client,
awkward.
Jeannie has a customer that she showed for several months that inadvertently went to a listing agent, entered into a contract. It went from an offer, where they made an offer, that was accepted. And once it was accepted, they called and needed help. And the only thing we could explain to them was how that contract works, and that with regards to that contract, we cannot help those individuals on that contract unless they get out of that contract and want to enter into a new one. Now, that agent was willing to send an email and say, this contract is void or whatever. Sending an email saying it's void is the same thing as requesting $50,000 in an option period in an email. It doesn't get you your $50,000, right? Until it's agreed upon in writing, it was just correspondence or whatever. So we encourage those people, if they wanted out of that contract, if you're in a contract and there is a provision to get you out, here's how you can get out of that contract. And once you're out of that contract, we can discuss another contract on that house, which may be lower or may be higher. We have no way to obligate them to any of the terms that they were in the previous contract.
Isn't that where procuring cause comes in?
There is, yeah, procuring, and we used to have procuring calls a lot. It used to be there. And the procuring, it's a gray area how the procuring agent comes. Just because a listing agent shows us property to a customer does not make them the procuring agent, okay? When they wrote an offer on it, they became the procuring agent. It's still touchy if Molly and Jim Smith write on Bridget's offer over there. They think they're using Bridget as the buyer's agent. They make an offer over there. They don't get it accepted. Now they want to come over here and have Terry write an offer on that same house. Bridget was the procuring agent in that deal. She wrote an offer on behalf of those people and was the procuring agent. Now we have to have an agreement that Bridget no longer has any claim or vested interest with those individuals. If they had made an offer and it was never accepted, they were the procuring agent. If they make an offer and it's accepted, and those people terminate that offer, now they go and get a different agent. Now that person was no longer the procuring agent. They only were an agent in that transaction until that one ended. That one ended, there was a termination, there was a release of liability, of fiduciary responsibility, of obligation, of performance, of specific performance, cleared the bandwagon. Now you can go over to another agent, say I want to go make a different offer. It'll be totally different. Different numbers, different close dates, different agents. You can switch agents. Just has to be clear how you do it. The grayest area is not when you're under contract and you terminate. It's when you make an offer with one agent, you don't get it accepted, and so you're going to run over here, and they often go to the listing agent. They go to the listing agent, and they make an offer, and they don't get it accepted because the listing agent represented the seller too. It's a fine line how buyers feel like when you represent the seller and me, and you're trying to get the seller the highest amount and the lowest amount, and so they're just like making offers. If you think it's easier to use a Greenwood King agent, then go use the Greenwood King agent. I can make the same offer the Greenwood King agent can make. You know, but if the answer's no, the answer's no, you know, and so you just resubmit. But, so when they go to the listing agent, they make the offer, doesn't work out, now they wanna come over here and make a different offer with a different agent. It gets a little hairy over there. It depends on how they wrote the offer. Was that agent representing the buyer and the seller? Did they sign a buyer's rep agreement? You know, what were they? If that agent just, in Jeannie's deal, that person wasn't the procuring agent because she didn't represent the buyer in any way. She didn't even imply that she represented the buyer. She only represented the seller. It was clear. She just represented the seller and wrote the offer on behalf of the seller. She didn't do anything to represent those buyers or whatever. So how can she be procuring when she didn't represent them in any way? She only represented the seller. If she had wanted to claim procuring agent, she would have had to have implied that she represented those individuals and was making an offer on their behalf. She wrote that offer only on behalf of the seller. So she wasn't the procuring agent. But it does get a little shaky when you switch agents after you made an offer. If you just look at a house, you're not the procuring agent. The internet, if everyone that looked at the internet looked at the house, that made them the procuring agent, I mean, that wasn't the procuring agent. And when they show the house, when you show the house, you're showing on behalf of the seller. That's what you're doing. I mean, that's really what we're doing, is we have to be clear. We're showing on behalf of the seller. If you just take a customer out, you're showing on behalf of the seller, and the seller wants to show the house so that people will make an offer, then I have to have your permission to go serve as your buyer's agent now, if I didn't have a buyer's rep agreement beforehand. If you have a buyer's rep agreement, then you definitely represented the buyer. I'm a buyer's agent. You're a buyer's agent wannabe if you don't have the form signed. You just have a customer, not a
So if
client.
you show that house and the customer buys the house, you don't get any commission at all because you're.
Depends on who represented them.
Okay, so you would
If you
have
show the
to-
house, and
you're
1 week
representing the
later,
seller.
they use a different agent to go show them the house, and you didn't have a buyer's rep agreement, you just showed, I mean, you were just showing houses. You didn't represent them.
And you didn't write the contract.
You didn't write any
the offer
contract, they weren't your
notice.
client, they were just a friend you were showing houses to on behalf of the seller.
So you were on behalf of the seller.
You were showing on behalf of the seller
Just a turnkey.
unless you had this.
And just to give you a little more on that, just to FYI, because it's experience, I'd love to share with you is the listing agent sent me the email that the buyer had sent to her specifically claiming she had no buyer representation. Consequently, the price should be reduced by what the commission would have been.
Oh, yeah, that always
And in hindsight, she's probably been using multiple agents to go see whatever she wanted to see at whatever
Right.
time. So it's a good lesson.
Yeah,
You
they're
will
very
get-
good lessons to learn.
So what time period should you put, Joe? What?
You know, I think it just depends on what, you know, I do not think we as an agency should tie people down for any length of time. And I want to be real clear. The minute one person calls me and says, I signed the buyer's rep agreement and I no longer want to be represented by an agent at Boulevard Realty, I'm letting them out immediately. And you can let them out immediately, no matter what the date says here. We do not want to represent nor coerce anyone or collect any fee from anyone that doesn't think that we've earned 100% of our money. Okay, so I don't care about any long dates, but there are really good buyers and there are really shitty buyers out there. Okay, so you have to use your judgment. If you feel like this person is really just using you in order to do something, then you have to protect your time and interest. You know, but a normal time period is a month or 2 or 3. It's not 6 months. It's not a year. Don't tie someone down. There's no point in doing that. If it's going well, they'll re-sign up, and if it's not, quit showing them and move on to somebody else. I mean, don't keep someone in your car that you think the first chance they're going to get, they're going to ditch you. How many people would you date or marry like that? I mean, let's just move on. There are more fish on the sea over here. Let's move on.
Can I ask one question? You know, you talked about when you write an offer for somebody,
Yes.
and you check that box that you're representing the buyer.
That is the same as the buyer's rep
So do you
agreement.
then still need to have that buyer, if it's not an in-house system, you don't? Okay.
No, the insurance company, nobody says I have to have that. It was clear that we were representing those individuals as a buyer, and you didn't need that anymore. And they made an offer. You know, that buyer's rep relationship was only on that house, though. If Jan Smith writes an offer, you write an offer on Jan Smith and you check the little box and it doesn't work out, and tomorrow you go out and see a different house, you don't represent her, you still represent the seller in that scenario until you either enter into a buyer's rep agreement or they make an offer on that house. So someone can use you to write an offer, it not get accepted, and they can go that same day to a Greenwood King agent and write another offer on a different house. I mean, you become the procuring agent for that house.
Okay.
So it'd be a little difficult for them to go out and use a Greenwood King agent the same day for that exact same house.
And
Because
just-
that would,
Yeah, one
fall
other
under
thing,
that
on
guideline.
this, just so you know, on the same client, because it was Jay's open house, and it has nothing to do with Jay. But that I met this particular person, and I had a form for them to sign and a box specifically that said, are you working with another, or an agent? Specifically, no, and conversation to the effect, no, and it's still.
people
Just have to be careful.
definitely believe when they just go and look at houses with someone that while you're just showing them houses, that they don't understand, nor have you really entered into a relationship, a buyer's agency there. You're just showing houses to people.
But some do understand that. 'Cause that
Some
happens-
do. I mean, most people have loyalty and it works just fine. I probably, other than selling my own listing, have used this form less than 3 times in my life and have never used it in the last decade.
Really?
I have never used it in the last decade. But I don't, when I used to get internet leads and I had to go show in the Woodlands, well, yeah, I would get the form. I don't even do that anymore. I refer them to Deb or Brandon or someone. So, I mean, I'm not in a position to want to go and tour the city like that.
What about the
I'm-
IABS? Do you ever go through that?
I go through it every time.
Okay.
I go through it every time. So I'm clear who realtors represent, buyers, sellers, or intermediary. I'm very clear about going over it when I go out with the buyer.
That's mandatory though.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely go over it. Yes, Brian?
Well, didn't Urban Living just use,
Okay.
did lose a lawsuit over?
So, yeah, let's discuss the urban living lawsuit
Yes.
deal just briefly. Urban living and Tudorf and property realtors like that, they're notorious for getting people to sign their buyer's rep agreement, which is not the same as our buyer's rep agreement, before they will go show a house. They tell people, I must have you sign this form because we represent the seller, and if you want me to represent you and show you the house, but we're not going to show you any houses without a buyer's rep agreement. It's what they, if you just walk into Urban Living, that's what they're going to say. You show up one of their properties, that's what they're going to say, and they're going to put the form in front of you, and you're going to sign that and probably the information of brokerage services, and you're not going to really even understand what you signed because they word it in such a way that you must sign this form in order for me to show you this house. Okay? There's one thing for me to show you a house, there's another and to enter into a relationship called buyer's agency. Okay? So, Urban Living had an individual, they'd signed the deal, they looked at the house, they did not liking that house. 5 months later they go and they're at a bar and they talk to a realtor and the realtor talks to them about a property that's not yet on the MLS, and they go over there and they make an offer, they get under contract, and they go to closing on that property. And it was within the time frame of the buyer's rep agreement that they had signed at Urban Living,
Which is a year.
which is generally a year to 6 months.
The court said that they would have to do
The agent, all these forms, their agent did, the agent that had them sign the form no longer worked at Urban Living, but their relationship was with Urban Living anyway. But yeah, I mean, the buyers didn't understand any of this. They really didn't understand any of this. The Urban Living mindset is to take these little forms every month and they have employees that check and see if any of the people that signed one of these forms show up on HCAD in a house. Okay, that's what they do. They use their resources to go and see if they can collect. Because this is a lawsuit. They're in multiple lawsuits over these issues. This was just one that got all the way to the court system sooner than the others. Or
Well, but the
whatever.
court ruled that they had to actively be.
Yes,
acting
what the
in their
court ruled
behalf in
in
order
their
for it to be
instance,
effective.
which is not a Supreme Court ruling or anything, but it said, yes, your form was not in good faith. It was not really a buyer's rep agreement. You didn't have any intention of representing that buyer. You just wanted compensation for showing the house to an individual for really the seller's purpose, not the buyer's purpose, or for your own monetary gain, not for the buyer's. For a true buyer's rep agreement to be enforceable, you have to serve as a buyer's agent, which means you have responsibilities as the buyer's agent. It outlines them. I mean, you have to help them with comps and inspections and mortgages and, follow the contract. You have to give them advice. You must serve as an agent in order to be compensated as a buyer's agent. And that's really what the court deal. The form that they signed was in the best interest of urban living and not in the best interest of that buyer. And so it wasn't true. It doesn't matter what it says buyer's rep over here, and if we really sign up to get married, then, that's not the same thing. They have to go hand in hand. And the buyer's rep agreement was not enforceable because it was not truly, there was no relationship of buyer's agency created by the form, nor was there any performance on behalf of urban living. And so they were not only not entitled to the 3% commission, they are now, responsible for the $150,000 worth of fees and attorney's fees that were a result of the lawsuit. Which is
For $12,000.
right, for $12,000 commission, they now have a court order to pay $150,000. That could get resolved, and they'll fight that, and they'll tell them how long that will even take, and there could be some other instances over there. But it was a very good deal that a jury of the peers in the community, understood that it doesn't matter what you sign on the form, you still have a responsibility.
Right.
You have a responsibility if someone signs a listing agreement that you perform as the listing agent also. You're not just because they sign up and someone buys it, you're not entitled to all the money over there. You have to perform your portion of the contract. So, this little form is very good to review. We'll post it on Back Agent for those that weren't here. Here's the buyer's rep agreement. I'm not going to go paragraph by paragraph of this thing because I do it in our in-depth classes or whatever, but if there's particular questions that you have, I'm happy to go over it now or in the future. But the point is,
I'm sorry, say what the point is and then I'll ask you.
the point is, when should you use a buyer's rep agreement? Okay?
Right.
Yeah. So, and you must use your judgment. If you're writing an offer on one of our listings, you're going to need the form. Okay? Just need, and we should explain. And you shouldn't just say, I need for you to sign this form because you're buying our listing. You have to say, if you wish to enter in an agreement where we serve as a buyer's agent on a property that already has a signed listing agreement where the firm represents the seller, we need your written permission in order to represent you as the buyer. Otherwise, we represent just the seller. So we need your written permission, and we have to have an intermediary agreement between the seller that the seller understands Boulevard Realty is representing both parties there. So it's very clear that we need the form in this transaction. There are many times with the relocation companies, they want proof of your buyer's agency position. And so yes, in order for you to often write on a Cardis or Brookfield relocation, it would not be uncommon to have to provide a buyer's rep agreement. Otherwise, while it's not necessary, it's advisable if you have a shaky client, then you should have a gut reaction whether these people are going to screw you if they're given the chance or not. And I would probably say, try not to do business with people like that. But if you want to continue on in that relationship, then I would get a buyer's rep agreement signed that shows that, because you're laying the groundwork. If you go over the buyer's rep agreement and they just won't sign it, they're not going to use you, and stop working with them. Now, you can make it for anything. It can be for the memorial villages. It can be for the week of Christmas. It can be for 301 East 16th. It can be very specific what you're limiting the buyer's representation for. We don't need a blanket one for the 5-county area for a 6-month period. There's no point in doing that. But if you're getting a client and they want to see Kingwood, the Woodlands, Cinco Ranch, and Pearland, I would get the form signed. And if they don't want to sign it, then they should probably get an agent in each one of those little individuals to show them for the hour and a half they're going to be there. Yes.
I have a question, is it the same with the seller's rep too, because?
Well, the listing agreement is the seller's rep. I mean,
Okay, but if the listing agreement expires and we don't close until January, even
If
though I do
they're
have
under-
a contract.
then you're under contract. If that contract terminated and they want to go back active, then we need either an extension of the listing agreement or a new listing agreement. But you're covered that date, because once we've entered into the agreement, they're still bound by the contract that they've signed.
Okay.
So you don't have to have necessarily an extension for those things. It's probably not even worth messing with.
So I used to be with a company that demanded that we used it, and so I got good at explaining it, but boy, am I glad to not, and now I do not, and except when it's legally necessary. However, there is this one question. Boy, how do you like for us to explain it to people when we are representing their interest rather than the sellers and verbally, not through a contract? How do you like to
Yes.
explain it?
I explain, so usually in my initial conversation, or if I'm having a follow-up conversation, I explain how brokerage services
Yes.
works. Again,
But where we've got the
realtors represent the
IRS
seller
Yeah.
unless there's an agreement that we represent the buyer. And it gets a little convoluted, like say when we're showing one of the Boulevard Realty listings, but when not showing listing, I want to serve as your buyer's agent.
Yes.
And I want to go out there and with some faith and confidence that you want me to represent you as a buyer's agent. And generally that conversation explains it and they say yes and we go on and I'm going to be their buyer's agent. When we write the offer,
The
I'm going to be the buyer's
IMBS is
agent.
good for that. When you
Yes.
pull that out, it just rolls.
You want me to represent you as the buyer, right? I mean, you don't want me to show you on behalf of the seller. And no one's going to want
Yeah.
you to show them a house on behalf of the seller.
Okay, quick question, are there any Boulevard Realty
Yeah,
listings
that's
that?
We have none.
do. I just want
We have none that have not authorized intermediary. We've never had one in the 5 years that I've owned it. And if we do, then we said to explain it to them again, we would notify, we'd notify even the agents if they just didn't want intermediary. But why would you not want our 65 agents to bring an offer? You don't have to take any offer that you don't find acceptable. And why would you even list with us if you
I
didn't
did
want our?
one once, remember?
Yeah,
Crazy woman?
yeah. It happened. I mean,
I mean, I wanted to show the house and
occasionally.
she got to the not because.
Well, I understand that. That was Sherry Bill, that wasn't the
Right.
intermediary.
I know,
Sherry
but
Bill
she
would
was
not allow Boulevard Realty agents, and I did turn her in. It really violates the code of ethics and the MLS. We have sellers all the time say, they call up here, they call me and they say, I don't want any agents from Greenwood King to show this house anymore because the last one left the door open, whatever. And I'm just going, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go down that path. If you want to remove your house from the MLS and not show anyone except we keep it as a pocket listing, then that's fine. But if we're going to put it on the MLS, we're not going to not show urban living agents, or we're not in a position to do that. So that happens more, but that wasn't an intermediary situation, but they didn't authorize an intermediary. They just didn't want, she just hated me and that was fine. Just fine for all of us,
It looked like
actually.
it really affected
It
you.
didn't really,
Yeah.
really dampen
Stunned your growth.
It is not really, if you're on the MLS, you really can't do that. It's fine. Okay, any other questions about buyers? Yes, Ken?
To specify an area, you write it in.
Try like the
special
memorial,
provisions.
yes, that's fine. The memorial villages, if you're doing something odd like that. Yeah, some people just townhouses inside the loop because they may want, they say, look, I don't know if I'm gonna buy a townhouse here or use my mother to buy me a house in Knollwood Village. And I'm going, okay, let mom take Knollwood Village, that's fine. But you go over here and if I'm gonna show you houses over here, then I want the buyer's rep agreement signed, for the townhouses inside the 610 loop or whatever, and that's fine. I get the drill. Everyone was honest. We know exactly what's going to happen. And there's no big deal with that. I think if you just worded that we're self-employed, commissioned individuals over here that are going out there and doing that, we're the only one that doesn't get paid until the bitter end. We don't get paid if you terminate in the option period. You write 100 offers and I never get paid one thing. But if I do work and if we're successful and go then, I want to be compensated for what it is that I do. Most people want to be compensated for what they do. I don't think they have a real problem with that. And if they do, you probably don't want to be doing business with them. So. Okay, no more questions about buyer's rep agreements, customer versus client. I'm just as guilty as everyone about saying client, 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 client. They're not a client until they've entered into some agreement with you. If they've made an offer, they're your client. If they haven't signed a buyer's rep agreement or listing agreement, they're really a customer. Yes?
So I had an old client call me this past week. She bought a house from me,
Mhm.
and she's buying a house next door, so I own her. She called me asking if I would help her with the contract, and I told her I can't.
We can't do that.
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Can't do it.
She's like, why? I said, because
You need to seek advice from an attorney because
I'm
we
a
don't have
licensed
real-
realtor.
That's right. We have liability implied with what it is that we're doing.
That's where you could, pay Boulevard 3%.
That's right.
And she
That's what
said,
we charge for
well,
our
I don't
fees.
think the seller would pay for it. I said, well, you're obviously don't feel comfortable with the contract and you're buying it as is. And
So
so,
then
Hire
could
an
you come
attorney.
into
Right.
it at that point though and insist?
Would I?
Yeah.
No, we wouldn't get involved.
no, because, and I.
It's not-
Yeah.
She's
The
already
liability
under
is too great
contract
for
or?
us.
She's already.
If you're already under contract, no, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, I can explain how an option period works.
Same.
I-
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I can
She-
give her I can
She
give you
just looked like
generic
she was
advice.
getting screwed of a deal, and I said, well, then you should have called me beforehand.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Alright, we want to have just a brief conversation then about fair housing, because we haven't had this conversation in a while. I'm trying to do it about once a year. But there's this huge push. This is a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal, they're in the New York Times, and they're in everywhere. Just explaining about fair housing, because as the economy picks up here, and there's more things out there, there's more instances of discrimination. So do we have a little handout for that? Oh, I didn't print that one really for you. That's all right. So we're just going to talk about it briefly because I already took a lot of the time. So we are not as individuals. There is, fair housing guidelines established by the federal government and the court system about what is discrimination. And there are protected classes, and we talk about them all the time. The race, color, religion, sex, familiar status, national origin, and sometimes, in some instances, sexual orientation, but not necessarily in housing. But if leasing a government building or something, the city of Houston has rules and regulations to some of that. But generally, we don't have that issue. So we get into these instances about fair housing, and if your gut tells you there's a problem, then we probably ought to have the conversation about it. I mean, that's where we get. The instances that get us the most, we don't have huge instances of race or color, but it's always worth mentioning. If you have a listing and they say, I don't want to list to Vietnamese people or Chinese people or black people, then we need to not list with those people. They need to go list with our good friends at Urban Living. Okay? So we're not going to do that. It's pretty clear about if someone says that, but it's often, and there are people out there that pretend to be, they work for, the federal government, and they go out there and they make application, and Talingua applies, and you get Talingua's driver's license, because you want a picture of Talingua, and Jane Smith applies for the same rental unit, and you don't ask Jane Smith for a copy of her driver's license, because you think Jane Smith sounds like a normal white woman. That's discrimination, okay? It's very clear that that's discrimination, that we're liable, that it's subject to criminal penalties and civil penalties. It's purely discrimination. So don't discriminate based on their name, their race, their color, their ethnic origin, like I say, if they're a Cuban refugee or not, you don't really care one way or the other at the moment. Race, color, pretty clear. And tied to that, you can't say to someone, you can't live off McGregor because that's mostly black people, it's not very safe. Okay? You can't say you can't live in McGregor because you wouldn't feel safe there. You can say, you should look at the HPD statistics and determine if that's an area you want me to show you or not. Perfectly legal to say that. And I would compare to the Heights or Westbury or any of the other areas that you're going to look at. You have to be consistent with some of those things. There are places, if I have a client and their 20-year-old daughter wants, they want me to help their 20-year-old daughter get a lease, I would say, I would not let my 20-year-old daughter live there. Okay, that's my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. I would not feel safe. There are areas I would not feel safe in. And here's the stats that would prove that you probably shouldn't do that. You're probably not as safe over a bail bonds place or a bar than you are in the middle of a subdivision. That's fairly clear about it.
Why can't you comment on the crimes?
You can comment, but you have to reference something of where you're getting that. So, I mean, I think you're safest saying that you need to refer, the sexual predators or whatever, they're prevalent throughout the whole city here. I'd be surprised how many there are in Harvard, Portland, and Columbia. And so you can't say that that's not as safe when there's just as many statistics to say Harvard's not as safe as Aurora and 26. So you have to be very careful how you say that. One that gets it, so handicapped people, we don't talk about enough. There's lots of handicaps. Some might be a gimp leg and they can't get up the stairs. Might be sight, might be hearing, might be any number. An addiction can be classified as a handicap or whatever. So we have to show those units to those individuals with handicap. You can't say, it's on the second floor, you can't get up there with a wheelchair. You're required to attempt to show that people, even if they're in a wheelchair, and it ain't easy to get the wheelchair up to the second story garage apartment, you have to show that unit to them. And there are some instances where owners might be required to make their units more handicap accessible. If it's no pets and they're sight impaired and they have a seeing eye dog, you must show that unit to them with their seeing eye dog. You cannot discriminate on the no pet deal with the seeing eye dog. Yes?
You don't mean we have to drag their ass up the stairs?
You do not have to physically carry them. You must make it available for them to get there. You can't say, I can't show you that unit because you're in a wheelchair and it's on the second floor and there's no ramp.
I was
Right. Do I? Take them to the bottom of the stairs and say, here's the scenario and see
You're
what
on
they...
your own.
Well, you do not have to carry them up there. There are ways that wheelchairs can get up steps, but if the hallway's not wide enough, the doorway's not wide enough, you have to make it available to them. You can't tell the other agent, because the other agent, let's just say I'm setting you up. The other agent says, I've got a client, you say no pets, they've got a 58-pound German Shepherd or whatever that's their seeing eye dog. You can't say the owner won't take that dog. You can't do that. The owner cannot discriminate based on that handicap. Okay? Can't do it.
So
Have to make it
if the owner
available.
doesn't want animals in their house, they have to take it with a handicapped person.
Yes, they do. Or they're subject to, that is a criminal offense to discriminate that individual's handicap, which requires the seeing eye dog. Absolutely. And there are instances where they must modify their unit to make it accessible to handicapped individuals. If there's no designated parking and we have a handicapped individual that requires special location to park, they must modify their scenario and make that handicapped space available to that individual.
Couldn't you just reject their application? It's not a-
Well, you could. It's so long as you're fair and consistent. And that's where they get it. You ask for one person's paycheck stub, but you get Jane Smith over here, and you don't ask for her paycheck stub. Got to be consistent when you get into these scenarios.
We give two equal applications.
It's the owner, as long as the owner decides. We don't want to decide.
Right, they can take the other that's equal, just doesn't require.
So long as they didn't discriminate.
Parking revamp.
If they have another choice, and it did not require modification, surely they can choose whoever they want, as long as they didn't discriminate. But if they find out they discriminated solely on the basis of the handicap, they have, if one was first and this one was second, that's a good enough reason. But if this one was first, then well, I want to hold out till we get another applicant, equal or greater, that doesn't have a handicap, that's against the law.
But what if it's not the price you want?
Well, then no, then you don't have to take it.
And then
Then you don't
isn't
have to
there
take it.
something about if the owner has it's a private individual that owns 1 to 4 units?
Discrimination's discrimination. I don't care how
Well, I
many.
know, but you're not required to provide the accessibility thing and all, right?
Usually there are ways around it, and usually we don't have these many instances. So I'm just saying, if you have a gut reaction, the main point is talk to me about it. I think.
Yeah.
Where we are getting, and it's a gray area about how this works with the single occupants versus the double occupants versus the roommates versus the married couple or whatever. So you're leasing a 500 square foot efficiency or whatever, and the owner says, I only want one person. It's just not big enough
One
for two
parking
people.
place, you know?
Yeah, and so we can do that. I mean, you can say that, it's perfectly legal. Where it's not legal though, where we have to be careful is you can't say single individual, because if a single mother with a small child made an application to that deal where we said single occupant, you cannot discriminate on her familiar status, because that is what that's protecting, is women that are pregnant, individuals with other children less than 18 must be given the same consideration as the single occupant. You cannot discriminate on the familiar status or whatever. So if they have a small child and they're making application, then you can't discriminate based on those individuals.
Isn't there a limit on the number of people per bedroom? So you have a one-bedroom place, you can't bring a family of 9 there, the one-bedroom, one-bath place, can you?
Well, you just can't discriminate based on familiar status. And if we're giving the unwed mother with 2 children not the same consideration as a single individual, all things being equal, yes, you would have to take the one with the 2 kids. Not necessarily 9 kids. Perhaps then we'd have another rule kicking in. But if you had single gay father with 2 kids who made an application for that 500 square foot deal, and he's adopted those kids in Russia and it's perfectly legal, then that is the same as a single person in the letter of the law, in federal guidelines.
Section 8 doesn't allow, Section 8 doesn't allow opposite genders after a certain age in the same bedroom.
But up to 18 they can be. I got it all right here. I left all this up for reference, all pages or whatever.
I have some clients that have twins, and one's a boy, one's a girl, and then the Section 8.
I mean, there might be some rule somewhere. I mean, if that's a Catholic church owns something, and they might have something. But remember, the Catholic Church sued all the time over their opinions of birth control, health care, and just because they say it doesn't mean it's the law. Right?
I just told them, I said, tell them that the little girl's sleeping with the mother, and that's
Right,
right
there you go.
It's like, y'all don't need to get out the house.
I just think the main thrust is I think you're paying more attention to it, and I think if you have a situation and you're not real sure, I want you to contact me so that we're real clear about how it works. I have the same scenario. I have my couples who have a garage apartment who really want a single woman applicant. They don't want a single man. But that is, theoretically, that is discrimination. You can't discriminate against the man. We just have to throw it up there and see what the applicants are. And so long as they don't discriminate and they find a female that was met the criteria, it's when they have the single guy that meets the criteria and they say, I want to wait another 2 weeks and see who else we get. It is discrimination. I mean, it violates the fair housing. And we are subject to it if we know about it and we continue to participate. So.
What about us taking on a client?
Well, we have taken on clients who said, I am not going to sell to a black person. I'm not doing that to my neighbors. And we need to walk out of the door and say, call my good friend Vinod.
When you're doing a rental and it's difficult to find a one-story wheelchair accessible, taking on that person
as a
to
client,
find them a place.
You're not required to represent anyone.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah, but there'd be plenty of one-story handicap accessible units in Montrose or something out of a fourplex or duplex or something. I wouldn't not take them necessarily because they were difficult. I think you have to be very, very careful if you don't take them because they're black and their name's Shaniqua.
That's another good question.
If Shaniqua calls and wants to see a house and we send her to floor time and nobody wants to take Shaniqua, we've discriminated against Shaniqua.
Even if it's just because it's a difficult situation
So
for
we're saying
somebody else.
leasing to black people is difficult?
No, it's just somebody that's, it might not be a racial thing that you're looking at, it's just
It's generally a racial
financial thing. That she wants a $600 place,
needs to be
3 bedrooms in the Heights.
You've already discriminated to assume Shaniqua can't afford $1,800.
No, she wants, what I'm saying is, you get those calls on
Yes, hey,
I want a
those
$600
properties,
place.
no,
They're not
no,
available.
simple conversation, yeah. Those properties generally do not exist
Right.
within the multiple listing service where they have to pay the realtor a 1-month fee. They do exist in our neighborhood, but you would be better served by calling individual owners who are not participating in the multiple listing service, who do not generally pay a fee to a realtor because they lease at a less expensive rate all the time. And the market's very strong. They don't have to use a realtor. The cheapest rentals of garage apartments in our neighborhoods are not listed on the multiple listing service. I mean, that's factual, it's true. I tell people that all the time. I have the lawyer say my son needs a garage apartment for $600 to drive the streets like the rest of us and find one that didn't list on the MLS. That's the ones I represent are going to want $950 or $1,200. They're not. I don't have any $600 garage apartment rentals anymore listed on the MLS. So it's okay to say that.
Okay.
Don't discriminate.
No, but I mean, that's, it can be turned that way very easily.
Right.
Nobody on 4-time wants the
Well, nobody
because of a real reason.
$600 garage apartment.
Yeah, 600, yeah.
I mean, you got to take the call and answer the questions.
Okay.
Usually it's not in our market area.
That's right. Right. I mean, yeah, if it's Pearland, then say you're better served getting an agent in the Pearland area. Be fine with that.
Yeah, but I mean, even though they're calling in, you have just as much right for them. They have a right to do business with you, and you have a right to do business with them, right?
Have a right to do
No, no, the client.
Really,
You have a right not to do business.
Yeah.
No, the client has, to- when they call in, they can choose or not choose to do business with you.
And you have the same deal as long as you don't discriminate.
Right, okay.
Based on color, race,
No, it's just-
religion.
If it has to do with, you know, they're looking for something that's impossible, or they're looking for an area that we don't
Well, it's
normally
called
work.
discrimination for a reason. If nobody wants to represent the single one with another with 2 kids, no one would. I mean, that's why we have laws that say you can't discriminate.
Yeah, but if you're having a conversation with them on the telephone, you don't know that.
Right. Okay. Okay, I think Clayton's having an open house here or something. What do you got, Clayton?
Wine and cheese.
When is this? Tonight. After y'all come to see Zeb Capo, y'all run right on over there. Anything else going on? Eric? Paula was just out half today. I think if you need her, she'll be back this other half. She's selling her house with an inspection or
Oh, if you
something.
want to serve on an advisory board, the deadline for submitting your application, I think it's the 5th or the 5th or
I already
6th.
submitted mine, so if you're interested in serving any of the boards on HAR, there's a sign-up sheet in
Yes, go first,
HAR.
yeah,
Just go over there.
The hayride's definitely 6:30 now?
Yeah.
It's not definite, I need to confirm it.
He'll be okay with it. He
I'm
probably
sure.
doesn't want to be on that
It's
list.
semi-definite.
Yeah.
It's
Or 6:30 and wait till they-
Setting up.
Sometimes he does do that.
Anybody looking for a lease for a cool brick bungalow in Nor Hill with a cool landlord that lives in the back house, come see me.
Okay, how much would that be?
About 24-ish.
Very good. All right, I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
So inappropriate.
How cool is the landlord?